Hey, I'd like to welcome you to Audrey Osler in our interview series. Audrey is a widely published academic and writer, and her research focuses on questions of social justice and education and has been translated into many languages, including Japanese and Chinese. She has a particular interest in education in post-conflict contexts, and this has led her to travel in a wide variety of interesting places and occasionally get into some scrapes. Her most recent book is Human Rights and Schooling, written for teachers and researchers. She's currently working on Where Are You From? No, Where Are You Really From? For Virago Press. And this is looking at identity, empire and belonging, drawing on memoir and family history. She is honoured to be an appointed a patron of the Steve Sinnott Foundation and looks forward to supporting us in various partnerships in the UK and internationally. So Audrey, I'd like to start with asking you about teaching human rights in the classroom, teaching human rights to children of various ages.
My own experience of teaching human rights is right across the age range, so not just in primary schools, but I think at all levels it's really, really important to engage with what children are interested in. And it brings to a more fundamental question about why are we teaching about human rights? And I think often human rights are seen as something about distant places, whereas I think the most important thing that needs to happen with children of all different ages is that they understand their own rights and they understand how they can defend each other's rights. Also, we see lots of older students in school standing up for really big issues. So Greta Thunberg is just probably the best known example, but there are children all over the globe who are standing up for the rights of other children, who are standing up for big causes like climate justice, environmental issues. So I think it's really important, wherever we are, that we find out what the children are interested in, what they care about, and then I think that's the best way in. My experience is that teachers often need a little bit of extra help, a little bit of extra support in teaching for human rights, because it's not necessarily something which is part of their experience. And I think it's also very, very exciting to many children, and I found this, to find out that all children everywhere have the same rights. That really kind of grabs their imagination. Sometimes they will point out, but that's not true in practice. You know, well, I have this, but so doesn't have that. And it's the idea that we're all born with rights and we all deserve these rights. So how are we going to make sure that everybody is able to claim them? And I think children can actually be seen as human rights defenders. They have a part to play in protecting rights. And it's not just about human rights in distant places. It's also about knowing what your rights are in your own society. So we see, for example, in the UK that in Scotland, they've just are trying to introduce or have introduced the Convention on the Rights of the Child into domestic law. And more countries are doing that. But children need to know how the law affects them. And quite small children, that's really important, so that they know when they can confidently speak out. It's not just telling them about what's right or wrong, but using the language of rights and helping them feel empowered. So I think education in this area is really, really important. I think it's really important to look critically at the human rights framework with teachers, so that they're not given this kind of set of principles which they just have to go along with, but they can actually engage with, and that they can understand and apply, rather than just telling people this is what should be and this is clearly not what is, therefore your job is to sort it out. One powerful thing about the international framework is that it actually legitimizes some difficult topics sometimes for teachers in particular situations. Teacher unions often are active in supporting this area of work. And so often they can get training and support there. There are particular materials out there for teachers. I've been involved. My first book I ever produced was looking at children's literature. and how young children's literature, storybooks effectively, including picture books, could be used to teach for rights. Storybooks can be a fabulous resource. Teachers often read a story to young children every day, or tell a story. There's an easy way of bringing these things into your everyday practice. You haven't got to make radical moves necessarily to do this. And there are increasingly materials out there, child-friendly versions of things. So going to safeguarding, the Council of Europe has got a convention on protecting children from sexual abuse and harm. It's commonly referred to as the Lanzarote Convention. Well, a colleague at Queen's University Belfast, Laura Lundy, who's a trained lawyer, she has made a child-friendly version of that. So there are nice materials that you can start using directly with children, even dealing with the law directly with children.
Thank you. Now, I wanted to ask you, how can we get to a stage where the problems that girls face are a thing of the past?
That's a really big question. And I think that things don't always go in one direction. And that's what we have to remember. I've learnt this the hard way over questions about racial justice in society. I think we've seen in recent years and heard, at least I feel I've heard, racial epithets and slurs used that in British society that probably weren't used publicly 10 years ago. So we can't always assume that things are always getting better. We can't assume that because women have struggled for this particular right or have achieved this level of inclusion and recognition, that it's necessarily always a progressive path forward. I think these paths are often little steps, and I think we have to have a vision of where we want to go. We have to really know what we want to achieve, and sometimes we have to celebrate the small steps. That doesn't mean I'm not ambitious for women's equality, for women's full participation. I do think it's very, very easy to see where women in other societies are not realizing their full potential without necessarily reflecting on our own immediate surroundings too. And I think we have to be kind of self-critical. I think through all kinds of situations, through clubs, through organizations, through just getting a few girls together with an adult and having a topic to discuss can really make a huge difference in airing the concerns that young women have and finding practical solutions. Yes, everyday conversations can make a real difference, and listening to people, because I don't know about you, but often we're rushing around in our lives and we don't necessarily stop and listen carefully enough. But I think it's really, really important that we as adults have a chance to listen and we develop those listening skills. And it's not just the teacher in a classroom, it is I mean, you have to ask yourself, what is a teacher? Is my job just to convey this knowledge or to get through this exam? Or if it's about justice, then it has to be about listening. And if it's about listening, I think we will uncover what needs doing. And listening is a skill that can take a lifetime to learn, but we could do with some practical skills in how to listen quite often.
Two really good points, that we're all educators and listening is really the core of everything moving forwards. And I wanted to just touch on what you consider educators' priorities now and after COVID.
Well, that's a really big question, and I think it might be very, very different in different contexts across the globe. But I think we've had time to think about the purpose of schooling. we've had time to reflect on the value of schooling, in terms of young people spending time together, a social environment, a place where it's one of, for many people, it's the only public place where they come in contact with people who are different from themselves. So I think we've learned to value schools as, we should learn to value schools as public places where people can engage with difference and are forced to engage with difference, if you like, because when you're in your family, when you're with your friends, it's a process of selection that are going on all the time, of the choice. In school, you're put with people whether you want to be or not. So the community of the school is something I think we can think a lot more about. In terms of the purposes of education, well, we've seen exams questioned and challenged, and we've seen that children's anxieties about studying come to the fore. I think it's encouraged us to think about being creative. It's certainly even being in lockdown has encouraged me to think about how can I be creative in my everyday life. We don't have to have the systems that we've got. We can change them. Most of public schooling, as we see it now, whether it's in countries like the UK or whether it's in a much lower income country, are based on a kind of 19th century model of schooling, a late 19th century model. There are other models, and the idea that you have to take exams at 16 or 11 or 10 or any other age is just random. There are many school systems where you don't have to do these exams at different places. So we've learned to think about how we measure learning and whether we're only valuing what we can measure.
Thank you very much, Audrey. It's been a pleasure to interview you.